Hello.
Guten Tag.
Hello. So I am operating on Central European time this week, but attending the Internet Governance Forum meeting in Oslo remotely.
That must be lots of fun.
Oh, it's delightful. So yeah, I've been up since 3 a.m. my time, 9 a.m. your time.
Yep. So I hope you don't have to miss too much for this meeting.
Oh no, actually everything I wanted to see at the IGF is done for the day.
Okay.
Okay, but I think we're also in a good number and a good time to get started. So let's do that. Hello everyone. This is an interim meeting of the CBOR working group. I think all involved know all involved, so there's no much point in introductions. The note well applies because this is an interim meeting of the IETF. You know what this means. If not, please ask someone, including us. So we have an agenda today that is, as always, in the notes, and that is mainly about, shall I call this, let's get EDN literals done. I'd like to start this with a brief timeline. This document has been adopted in 2013, first half of the about June. And we had a first working group last call already in 2023 and largely thought this document was done. And now the document has been stalled for quite some time. So let's focus on whether there are any things that we have to change before we can send this off and whether the remaining conflicts have been resolved. Given what I've read in the mailing list, I'd like to ask you to stay focused on the document and not the 100,000 things we could go on to from there. In particular, new features or like how this fits in the whole ZDDL ecosystem, unless there is good reason why that should have an impact on how we do, whether and how we do CBOR application. CBOR EDN should be out of scope, as are any details of the example. So if someone presents an example for the purpose of showing where an application literal is useful, please let's not get hung up on the details of that example, because after all, those are examples. That's about what I wanted to say for introductions. And I think that there are two large issues that have been brought up in the last chat and the last threads. That is, whether it's a good idea to do application literals and how precisely, and in extension about sequences of application literals. And if I understand correctly, Carsten, you have a few words that you want to say on probably those topics too. Before we get started there, just to kind of set scope, are there any other issues that are than those related to application literals that anyone considers unresolved here? That's that. I
Sorry,
have
yes,
nothing.
there is one which is still a blocker for me, which is figuring out how correct error messages can be given for app strings because of the way that it's currently specified.
Okay, but that is part of application literals, right? So
it's a very specific part of application literals that is separate from should they be there or their semantics or etc. But yes, I'm willing to confine my remarks to that section.
Okay. Hearing none more, Carsten, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. My voice doesn't work that well today. I hope I can do this meeting without big problems. So just, I get back to Joe's point in a minute, but just as a reminder where we are with this document. So we adopted it pretty much 2 years ago. We had that working group last call ending by the end of 2023. So we pushed this to the ISG, and the IETF last call ended about a year ago. And it turned out that the working group still wanted to do some tweaking. So the ISG handed that document back to the working group. And we had a second working group last call ending in January. So we are currently officially in the status working group last call comment processing, and I hope that this status ends with an ISG submission. So this document has this relatively lively history, because it just started out as a way to have a registry for literal syntaxes, and that's essentially what the working group adopted. And then we had several desirables interfering with getting that part of the work done. And one desirable was to actually have an ABNF grammar, which I think is definitely a good idea, but it does take its time to do a good ABNF grammar. And then at some point we had the desirable to roll up the various documents that contribute to what is extensible diagnostic notation today. And I think that's also a good thing, but it also requires a lot of work to get this done. So this is the reason why we have been working on this for 2 years. Of course, when you have real time going on, you have lots of wonderful ideas and need to find out whether these ideas are actually good for getting it into the document or should not be included in the document. And one item of discussion we had was how we actually could put grammars that we have for the extensions into the base ABNF of EDN. And there is no good answer to that question. But I think we now have an answer. So we do have the proof that this can be done, and I have implemented both variants, so I know it's not particularly hard to do this, but I have some slides on that later on. And I think what came a little bit as a surprise to people who weren't quite aware of how this document fits into the overall CDL2 roadmap, we found a reason and a way to restrict, to lift the restriction of EDN literals from just string parameters. And I'll get to that in a minute as well. And the fact that the document was handed back to us from the ISG essentially gave us the opportunities to put this in. Okay, so extensibility, I think the basic idea is clear what we mean by extensibility. I'm not going to explain bazaar versus cathedral extensibility again here. Extensibility is really something that is very much to the heart of the CBOR ecosystem. We have tags, which were very controversial when we started CBOR, and now I think most people see why it's a good idea to have that, and why you may turn up with really bad tag definitions. I mean, that's the problem with bazaar, the bazaar situation. So we have a few bad tags, and sometimes we have defined additional tags to replace those. and so on. But we have made quite some progress. So in the diagnostic notation, the tags came in, of course, right in 2013 with the syntax-only construction. So if you want to use the decimal fraction tag, number 4, you actually write down the number 4. You have to know that number, and then give the content of that tag, which in this case is an array with 2 elements, the exponent and the significant. So one of the things that we would have liked to be able to do, but that didn't come up until later, is define application extensions for tags. Now, the example here is probably not that useful. I mean, that's not much abstraction gained here by using an application extension called decimal. But I think it's a good example because everybody knows tag 4. And this is essentially the way we would have done the diagnostic notation for tag 4 if we had this syntax from the outset. So when we set out doing this, we only had literals that had one string parameter. So we had the application extension name, single quote, the text, and then another single quote. And this maybe might have led us to focus a lot of energy on that syntax. And yeah, maybe that was bad lack of foresight. So structure parameters are something that of course CDDL has a lot. So we have in CDDL an extension point that is essentially the parallel, not the analog, but the parallel to EDN application extensions, which is the control operator. And sometimes these control operators need more than one parameter. And we have a way to write this down in CDDL. This is not beautiful, but since we defined that extension point the way it is in 2016, yeah, this works. This is not beautiful, but it works. And so what we did was providing structural parameters for EDN as well. And it turned out that the sequence syntax that we already have in EDN fits in right, it just drops in. So the proposal is to use the double angle brackets for these structural parameters as well. So this is what came in new with -17. I haven't done a -18 yet because there wasn't really much to do. I mean, there's this one bug that the INR table doesn't work, but yeah, that's easily fixed. So you can look into the editor's copy if you want to. It's linked from one of the previous slides. So essentially what this means is that hash single quote foo single quote is just a shortcut for hash parameters foo parameters, and I essentially had to change the syntax and align to the syntax and remove one check to implement this. That was a pretty interesting experience. So this is the structure parameters, and I think that's the one thing that people still are wondering whether we should be doing them. The other thing that took us a long time was supporting integrated grammars. And there, again, there is no good solution for that, but it is possible to come up with one that works. And of course, the problem is that an integrated grammar actually has to do the string parsing together with any application-oriented parsing. And by defining a few ABNF rules, that you can use in the right places, this can be made bearable. I'm not saying it's nice, but it's bearable. So you can take the definition you would have for just the string, not the string literal, but for the string, and convert this into an integrated grammar by replacing some of the rule names with the ones provided by these bricklets in figure 7. So you can build your grammar by simply using I-HT instead of just HT, and so on. So this shows the H and the B64 grammar both in a separate way and in an integrated way. And I think in contrast to all previous versions we have had, this is now actually readable and amenable to human. I have had lots of audio problems. I've had lots of audio problems this week. Sorry for Michael there. Yeah, if I was just showing my picture here, I think people would have hollered already. Yeah, so I consider this comment addressed, with the exception of what Joe just said, that it would be useful to do an error message propagation from a separate layer 2 syntax down to a layer 1 grammar. And I have promised to write code for that, but I haven't managed to find time to write that code. That's very much on my agenda, and the latest time when this will happen will be the hackathon. I hope I can do it before the hackathon in Madrid. Basically, I need to change my code to actually provide the signals instead of just generating an error message, provide the signals so that this computation can happen. Joe.
Yeah, so as you're doing that, can you be thinking about generalizing it for other people's implementation, like how other people could use a similar approach, and not just have it completely embedded in your code, if that makes sense? Could you, as you're doing it, take a couple of notes about the process you went through,
Sure.
the thought process, that sort of thing?
Yeah.
So this is really the only big blocker for me. I can live with almost everything else we've got.
Okay. So basically, the point is, if you want to use the error messages from the layer 2 grammar in your layer 1 error messages, then you need to have the relevant parameters, the byte count and things like that, in a way that the binary search that I was talking about actually can do its job. And yeah, I will write this up, possibly even in a way in Wiki or so, that we can have this around with the document.
Sorry to interrupt. The approach that I thought of was to use source maps.
Yes.
And that would solve the problem, but it would be such massive overkill for this problem that I couldn't see embedding an entire source map implementation just to do this.
Yeah. So basically, the approach that I want to implement actually only triggers when you have an actual syntax error, and then it takes the syntax error from the layer 2 grammar down into the process that generated the input to the layer 2 grammar, and converts the byte count and these things into something that can be turned into an error message at layer 1.
I understand what you're trying to accomplish. I just don't see your algorithm yet for doing it. That's that you keep asserting that it's possible, which I totally believe you that it is. I totally believe that it's in your head for how to do this. I can't see it yet. That's all.
Okay, yeah, I need to do it. I don't believe these things until I have implemented them. So I'm with you on this. Okay, there was a comment from one in the chat that I'm not sure I can pass.
Sorry, I was just saying that you made a comment about the ABNF being easier than it was before. I don't see it being particularly easier or harder, but I don't think it's that relevant to this decision. The decision is about what the functionality is that the working group wants and whether, whether the benefits outweigh the costs. So I think that's a red herring. I think it's it should be a non-issue whether the ABNF is slightly easier or not.
Yeah, for actually having a workable extension point, it's indeed not irrelevant how easy this is to use. And on the other hand, not every implementation has to do the single step parsing. So if you wanted to do it easy, you do it in 2 layers. And if you really want to have an optimized implementation, then you can do it in 1 level. And again, I have implemented this, so this really can be done.
Yeah, again, I think we're not talking about the main issue, which is like, what's the motivation? Like, what are the use cases that motivate using app sequences? So I pushed back on a number of the use cases, basically saying that I didn't think that they were like practical use cases. Vadim said on the list he had some use cases that involved nesting related to quoting, but he used like his example on the mailing list from March, I think it was. It used like identifiers, app and foo, and he didn't provide a real concrete example of something that you might do or want to do, right? So what's a concrete example that we might want to do? Because hash isn't it, Concise signing isn't it, because those things require other things, and so the use case does not work as described.
I'm trying to find out why you say this doesn't work. Yeah, Vadim is right. I did the hash as an example just because it's really easy to implement.
But
of course, I'm way more interested in the other cases.
Hash of an H string or a literal single quoted string, it's not useful because it doesn't, because it's, if you end up using this in order to have duplicate data in your document, then that's not really useful. Like, you might as well, if the purpose of it is so that I can write that on a whiteboard, you can write a comment that just says this is the SHA hash of something, and you can put ... when you write it on a whiteboard. If you're doing this in the CI, no one is going to want to go and implement this in a CI if they have to go and put the same value in 2 different places in the EDN document.
Well, we have ways to use the same value in different places in the document. We have, for instance, the ref app extension. I'm not saying that ref is exactly what we would be using in this space, but I think we have everything we need to make this happen.
So Vadim said he had a concrete use case, which was related to nesting, and I asked him, or he said he had a use case of nesting and quoting, right? Nested quoting. So I sent a message back and said, like, can you provide a concrete use where we would be using this? I think there may be something compelling there, but I don't see it yet. He hasn't provided enough concrete there. So maybe he can write an example in the chat, or he can say something.
Just so that we don't get distracted by something that won't get us forward. Nesting is one thing that can be done with the sequences. It's not the only. It's not the only thing. There's the hash example. There's the decimal example around. Unfortunately, I don't remember where I ran into this. When like about a year ago, when I hoped we would have that, and then didn't even bring it up to not slow the process down. So is nesting the one thing that this hinges on? Because I don't think so. And yes, nesting is probably hard to find good examples for.
No, I think it's really hard for me to argue this because it's so obvious. CBOR is about structured data. That's the whole point. We want to have in the interchange format that allows you to actually expose structure without pain. And putting some extension point here that only works for strings when we are in the process of liberating ourselves from strings is completely unthinkable for me.
So it shouldn't be that hard to come up with a concrete example that is compelling, that does not require some unimplemented new feature.
Well, it will require a new application extension, of course.
No, that's fine to show an example new application extension, but it shouldn't require some other new thing that also doesn't exist. Just a compelling example application sequence would be really nice.
So,
and I'm saying that the ones that have been provided on the list, they're not compelling because they're either not self-contained, or there's an easier or like cleaner way to do them, or they're just as easy to do with app strings, right?
So there's one that I can bring up quite quickly, that is expressing in EDN tag what are they called, tagged arrays. So you could write, and please follow me in the minutes here. You could write something like U8 1 2 99 42 23 to express that thing, which is otherwise. Does anyone know the tag number for U8s off their head?
Well, float would be 80. 16-bit float would be 80. Don't know the other numbers.
Of course, that makes it a bit harder for me to come up with the example, but that's one thing off my head that just works as a replacement for an otherwise hard to read tag using the structure, using the sequence notation. Not saying it's the best example, it's just the first that came to mind.
Yeah, so basically what you are doing here is looking at the tags and exploit this natural relationship between a tag and an EDN function to create a readable version of values for that tag. And that's what I did with my decibel on the slide, but maybe that was too trivial, and the tagged array is maybe a little bit more obvious in how you would use this. But not everybody here in this room has used tagged arrays, so I wasn't sure whether that would be a good example to demonstrate this. But just about any tag will do, And maybe doing something like Concise 1 is actually the benchmark that we should use to demonstrate this.
Yeah, as I mentioned on the list again, like tagged arrays are, or sorry, Concise 1. Again, it requires, for it to be useful, it requires a way to not be duplicating data. So you need to be saying that the signature is the signature of a concatenation of the protected headers and the payload, right?
Just help me, please. Where's the duplication? Because sure, if you want to use this as like a programmatic way to spare applications the CBOR encoding, so that you kind of that CI application, there might be duplication there. But if you just write on the whiteboard, like I don't care what the ciphertext is. I want to convey that this is the ciphertext of whatever the of whatever that this is the plain text of whatever that ciphertext is.
I gave, so as I said, I gave examples on the list about this, and nobody like engaged the technical content of my comments, right? If I'm writing on the whiteboard, I can write whatever I want in comments and make things very clear in comments. If the purpose is to have a computer be able to take this and turn this into a Concise 1, and I need to put the same, duplicate the same strings in multiple places, that's a failure. We have not done a good syntax if we have to put something, some literal value in multiple places. And like maybe there is something like, there were some examples related to regular expressions, right? But the thing is like nobody's seriously suggested that we want to run regular expressions on things inside of literal values and then have the output of that become some CBOR.
But we're getting hung up on concrete examples again.
We're not getting hung up on concrete examples. I'm saying there should be an existence proof that this mechanism is useful as defined. And we have not even come up with a single use case that I think is actually proves that it is useful by itself.
So I have a family of use cases where I'm basically using EDN to annotate output of embedded devices. That activity has stalled because EDN has stalled. But I'll be happy to go through the all the desired features there and pick up the ones that are interesting. Granted, most of them work well with strings, but I've only explored the first two because then I didn't want to rewrite the code every time EDN would still change. So I'll take an action item there to like go through that list and come up with a few more examples. But if it's like if all that we are stuck with is that we're not sure whether for the sequence notation we have examples, and if we're happy with everything else, I'll count that as a win for this meeting.
Yeah, we still have Joe's item, but I think that those might be two action points that come out of this meeting.
So I'll say that, like, I was a little annoyed that the angle bracket syntax got added so late in the process, but it wasn't that bad to implement. It has the same problems I've got for app strings, but it wasn't too bad. And so I'm willing to live with it if it moves us forward. I do think that Rowan's got a point here. I think possibly you could say, I think his argument is that everything that we've come up with that is valid is trivial, which is not unreasonable. but it's also not that much code to implement these things. I don't know, like, I want to make sure that we know what happens when somebody uses one of these things and my code doesn't support it, like what you're going to get back. And that requires us understanding the whole raw versus cooked thing that we've been going back and forth on adequately. But I think that's the same as for app strings, so it doesn't bother me that much.
What are the objections against app sequences? I don't understand why you are so against them.
So my concern is that we go and introduce this new syntax, and then we find out that all of the actual use cases that the real use cases that we have for it require something else, and that something else requires us to make another syntax change.
Is it? I see these sequences as a foundation for the new syntax in future. So it has to be done before that.
So I don't think what I'm asking for is that unreasonable to say, somebody give a compelling example, just one example, right? That says, wow, okay, this shows how, without adding any new syntax other than application sequences, how we could express something that gets in there and really is much better than app strings. My fear is that we're going to end up with something where, well, in order to do something useful, we need to put we're going to have the same escaping problem, but a different variant on it, or we're going to need to change the syntax so that we allow, for example, like tags inside of one of the things but not inside of others, and we should have really handled that inside of the BNF, or that we're going to need some new syntax, and we really wanted to modify it slightly so that we could refer to other items and other parts of the document, right? Those are all concrete fears, and I've seen this movie before, where somebody had a great idea for a new syntax, and it wasn't, they weren't able to sort of concretely express like how this would work. They had an intuition. It was close. They got 95% of the way there, and then like it wasn't quite right. And I have been one of the people who have done that, right? I've also been one of the people who's found the problems in somebody else's syntax that was 95% right and felt nice.
Yeah, I think that the nice thing is that we have a pretty flexible data model that we can put all these things in. And as you can see from the control operator example, the .printf example, we do get things to work on the CTDL side. Obviously, in CTDL, we have ways of naming things. And I think what you are saying is you would like to have ways of naming things. And of course, we could add syntax for that. Or we could say, we already have syntax. Why don't we use app sequences for that? So given that you essentially can do Lisp in the syntax, I'm pretty sure that we will not hit major problems doing this. But of course, we don't want to build Lisp here. We want to do something that's more usable than that.
All you got to do to convince me is to show a compelling example that sucks with app strings, is nice with app sequence, doesn't require anything new, and actually returns some useful CBOR.
So while while you've been talking since I took up the item and like listening with admittedly only one ear, I went through the text registry, and I'm now at tag 280, and I already have like 4 examples or so that work where if someone wants to use an app string for that particular item, they will be quite well off with the sequence. For example, the language tag thing, the alternative to having lang open bracket open angle my text and then as a string that language would be to come up with some internal language. Where one would then once more
No, that's not what we want to do.
Exactly the one thing. So that you might like add something, or you put quotes around it, and like that's just the kind of levels of nested parsing that we'd like to avoid.
Exactly.
And as like languages, array tags, tag 256 is used for sets. Tag 280 is used for symbols, which most of the time is just a single one, but sometimes there's like 2 components to that, which may not have like the languages in which they're used might have a separator that could be used in there, but in general there is none. So and I'm only at 280 of a list that goes on for like I'm about a third of the page scroll down.
Okay, I mean, but can you type some of those into the chat, Christian, please?
Sorry. I thought that everyone was looking at the minutes as well. I'll copy them over in the minutes.
I will look at the minutes.
Sorry. But it's sorry, I didn't say that clearly enough that I was referring to what I was writing there. And like I'd be happy like if for 1 or 2 of those it turns out that it's not a good idea, might well be so, but I don't think that all of them are bad examples.
Let me rephrase it. We have an experience from real programming languages, for example, web backends, where the typical is to use SQL embedded in strings of outer scripting programming languages, and then you have to escape, and it is tedious, boring, and prone to errors, SQL injections, and so on. So the syntax for such strings, which allows to have less escaping, is always a progress. So we can use our intuition and apply this knowledge to EDM case, and that's so you get that app sequences which have less syntaxes inside them is better, because it will have as less escaping as possible. I've sent a very short SQL example to the mailing list just now. Maybe it illustrates how app sequences better than previous substrings.
Yeah, the example is a bit weird because in the sequence syntax you use EDN syntax inside the angle brackets, so that there is no way to put some vertical bars or something like that in there, because EDN doesn't know what that is.
Didn't understand.
Let me try to rephrase. Everything inside the angular brackets has to match the CBOR diagnostic syntax, because otherwise a generic tool cannot know when to stop.
Well, generic tool can know where to stop by just searching for the closing sequence and not
unless there is that closing sequence somewhere in the inner text that would get us into XML style C data. But
no,
I
just
suggest
one.
that, as long as those who are looking for concrete examples of something where the sequence stuff is useful, I suggest we and SQL is not the last one that we need so that this works. I suggest we take the SQL topic offline, because if we have easier is that people will argue against.
What I am talking about is what I need as a practitioner programming in practice, not about current ABNF or what. This is what users of CBOR want. I am an example of CBOR user, what I want from EDN. So that's an example. Yes, you can't have this syntax right now in plain CBOR sequence, but with application sequence, it should be enjoyable. That's what we users want from you standard makers. And for those users who will be using it in practice, writing EDN by hand, it doesn't matter how complicated ABNF is. They just want to do their job more easily. That's what about technical progress is all about.
Okay, at the end, and I think we are 10 minutes to the end, maybe we can have a little bit of a look at the timing that we're trying to achieve here. It's 10 days until the internet draft deadline, so I would like to make sure that we have a -18 out with the results of this discussion reflected before the internet draft deadline. I also would like to have a pretty clear idea of what we are going to do at the hackathon in Madrid and during the meeting in Madrid. So maybe we should spend some time discussing that.
Well, I guess the first thing, Karsten, is to you. Do you have document updates that you will queue up from the discussion that we've had so far?
Well, if we come up with a really good example, I would like to have that in the document, of course. But of course, I also cannot rule out that we do want to make changes because we learned something from from making these examples. Yeah, you're right. One way of doing this would be to submit the -18 today, based on what's in the editor's copy, which is not much because I haven't had a lot of reports about things that need to be fixed there. And then we can use the next 10 days to actually do a -19.
Right, and make a plan for the hackathon at that point.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, does anyone else have something to add at this point? And Rowan, are Christian's examples resonating with you?
You know, I think that it's nice to see something that's actually concrete, that does something. I'm not sure that they're super compelling, but they're not like, but I mean, they feel like we're getting there.
Right. So what's the bar? And I think the bar is that that there's reasonable evidence that there's a point difference, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've made my point that we don't want to think that we've got the right syntax and then realize later that we didn't.
No.
And
Yes.
that, like,
And I agree with that.
having the working group looking at compelling use cases, even if I don't agree that something rises to the level of compelling, that doesn't mean that it's not compelling to, you know, a plurality or, you know, a substantial number of people in the working group.
Okay. So we're at least heading in the right direction there. Yeah, so let's analyze the use cases that are there, see if there's anything else, and see if that validates the syntax that we have.
Yeah, and my meta issue is that, you know, like, I think it's really good for us to document, like, the requirements that motivate us to make certain design decisions, because that helps people in the future, like after we're long gone.
Joe, I would have asked you the same question anyway.
Why did they do it that way? Yes.
So I wonder if these app sequences could be added later.
Well, no. This would just repeat the same situation we are in right now.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, that makes sense. It's worth asking that question when we come to a point like this, just to make sure. If it's difficult to add later, then we should finish out the conversation here.
Thank you.
Okay, and I'll say that the timeline that I was hoping for was that we get as much as we can done on this call, which I think we've done. We get an update out. I'm hoping that we can finalize that during the IETF meeting, at the hackathon, at the CBOR session, and start a working group last call after Madrid. And that's, so the real goal here is that let's focus on this, and for those who think we need to make changes, let's see what's absolutely necessary and what you can live with, and let's get this out, because we're all kind of frustrated with this, and the ADs are starting to get as frustrated with us as well. So. Now, that doesn't mean we should publish garbage because we need to get it out, but it does mean that we should, A, focus on it, and B, be willing to compromise in order to get something reasonable out that we can live with and that we think is usable. Okay, what do we want the next 5 minutes to be?
I did prepare one AOB item, that is, if anyone wants to present anything in Madrid, please just send us a mail in the chairs and we'll start assembling an agenda. Yeah.
Right. The first thing we're going to do next, well, 2 weeks from now, is put together the agenda for Madrid. So yes, let's make sure we get some submissions in. You can send them to the mailing list. Even better, put them directly into the HedgeDoc notes for the next call. Just increment the sequence number on the HedgeDoc for this one to get the next one. And we've set up dates with the core working group. We're going to continue with our same cadence for the interim calls. That's also in the next HedgeDoc agenda. The dates are in there. And we got stuck on Friday. Sorry about that. It could change, but we'll see. All right, Christian, shall we call it today?
I think so. Thanks a lot. That was a very productive meeting from my point of view.
Yes, I agree.
I rather thought it was a very hot meeting.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.